My name is Isabelle, I am 30 years old, and I live in Denver. This Christmas, I thought it would be like every other year. The family gathered around the dinner table, laughter echoing, the Christmas tree glowing with lights. But instead, what I received was just a short message from my mother. This year, just your sister's family. Keeping it small. Only 8 words, yet enough to make me feel like I was once again pushed outside, as if I had never truly belonged there. The humiliation from years past surged back instantly. The Christmas mornings without gifts, the dinners where I was pushed down to the kids' table, the moments when my achievements were drowned out by one single name. Chloe, the perfect sister. I didn't argue, and I didn't beg. I just replied with a single word. Enjoy. But in that very moment, another thought lit up inside me. I would not sit alone in this cold apartment anymore. I had a special place. My family knew nothing about a mountain ranch worth $5 million in Aspen. A place I had quietly built as proof that I was strong enough to create my own table. And this year, I would open its doors and invite everyone who had ever been cast aside like me. A Christmas not centered around the so-called perfect sister, but around people who truly wanted to show up. Have you ever been pushed aside by your family, made to feel like you didn't deserve a seat at the table? If you have, leave a comment and tell me where you are listening from, so I know that on this journey, I am not alone. I remember it clearly, even from when I was young, my life always seemed to be measured against the shining shadow of my sister, Chloe. In my parents' eyes, Chloe was the flawless golden child. She was beautiful, graceful, outgoing, the endless source of pride they paraded in front of neighbors and relatives. I, on the other hand, was often introduced with nothing more than a dismissive line. "This is Isabelle, Chloe's sister." That sentence was repeated so many times it became my entire identity in the eyes of others and even in the eyes of my own parents. The holidays are supposed to be a time for families to come together, for children to wait eagerly for gifts, and for laughter to fill every corner of the house. But for me, those days always made my heart tighten more than any other time of year. I still remember one Christmas when I was 14. The tree was decorated beautifully, lights blinking across the living room, and stacks of gifts were piled high beneath its branches. As everyone opened their presents one by one, I sat there waiting. Chloe received a delicate gold bracelet, and my mother kissed her cheek and said, "You deserve this because you've made us proud." I forced a smile, my eyes fixed on the tree, hoping to spot a small box with my name on it. But when the last bit of wrapping paper was torn away, I realized there was nothing for me. My mother looked uneasy and said, "You're older now, you probably don't need toys anymore." I nodded as if it didn't matter, but inside, something cracked. The favoritism wasn't just in the gifts, it seeped into every word, every glance. When Chloe was chosen as captain of the cheerleading team, the whole family threw a party to celebrate. When I won first place at the school science fair, my mother only said softly, "That's nice, but don't stay up too late anymore." My father hardly bothered to glance at the small project report I brought home, too busy bragging to the neighbors about my Chloe. There were times when I tried to join the family conversation, eager to share that I had successfully rebuilt an old computer from scrap parts in the garage. But just seconds later, my mother shifted the topic to how Chloe was about to join the debate team. Every word I said seemed to hang in the air, abandoned, with no one willing to catch it. Through all those years, I slowly learned how to shrink myself. Instead of fighting for attention, I retreated into my own world in the garage, where the smell of grease, the sight of scorched circuit boards, and the crackling sound of the soldering iron became my companions. I buried myself in chips and wires, patiently soldering one connection after another. I remember once spending an entire week repairing an old radio a neighbor had thrown away. When it finally played its first song, I was so overjoyed that I ran upstairs to show my mother. She only gave a faint smile and said, "That's impressive, but don't forget to help your sister get ready for tonight's party." Chloe never had to try to be loved. For her, attention and recognition from our parents were as natural as breathing. For me, I had to do everything I could to prove I was worthy of notice, only to be met with the occasional indifferent nod. Many nights, I lay in bed listening to the sound of laughter drifting from the living room, and I asked myself, am I really just the unnecessary child? That question carved itself deep into my mind, following me well into adulthood. One of the most haunting memories happened when I was 17 and received a full scholarship to one of the most prestigious universities in the country. I ran into the living room, trembling with joy, the acceptance letter still shaking in my hands. My father glanced at it and said, "Stanford? That's so far away. Are you sure? Chloe will still be close to home, much more convenient." I froze in place. Even as I stood on the threshold of a future most people could only dream of, all they could think about was whether I would be convenient for the family. Those wounds never healed. They built up inside me, forming a heavy weight I carried everywhere. They made me feel I always had to do more, achieve more, work twice as hard just to be recognized half as much as Chloe. And in the end, I came to a bitter realization: my parents' recognition would never come. I could save the world, and in their eyes, I would still only ever be Isabelle, Chloe's sister. I don't say this to blame my sister. Chloe was simply living in the role our parents handed to her. But it was the way they divided their love, the staggering imbalance, that turned me into an outsider in my own family. And that is why, even now, with just one short message cutting me out of Christmas, all the old scars immediately start to bleed again. As I sit alone in my apartment, thinking back on those days, I realize something: those wounds were not an ending, but a catalyst. Without the times I was forgotten, I never would have buried myself in the garage, finding joy in wires and circuits. Without the moments I was pushed aside, I never would have had the drive to leave our small town and chase my own path. That abandonment, in its own way, became the fire that pushed me to rise. But it also carved in a truth I cannot deny. I was never, and perhaps will never be, seen as important to them. Leaving that small town in Indiana for California was a turning point I'll never forget. On my first day stepping onto the campus at Stanford, suitcase heavy in my hands, I felt both nervous and excited. With a full scholarship, I knew I had finally proven my worth, at least to the world outside. But even then, my parents still didn't see it as an achievement worth celebrating. On the evening they sent me off, my father only said, "That's so far away. Will you really be okay? If only you had chosen a school closer to home, like Chloe, we would feel so much better." Those words etched themselves into my memory, a constant reminder that no matter how far I reached, in their eyes, I would always be the one who went against the family's wishes. My years at Stanford were a constant struggle of studying, working, and simply trying to survive. I had no support from my parents. Every expense beyond the scholarship, books, food, housing, I had to cover on my own. There were nights I slept on a sofa in a cramped rented room, my backpack as a pillow, waking up in the morning to head straight to class and then to work. My meals were often instant noodles, sometimes cheap leftover pizza from a restaurant. There were nights I coded while eating dry ramen straight from the packet, tears falling more from stress than from the salty taste. Yet in those lean years, I learned resilience and discovered my path: technology and logistics. I started my first company at 23. It was a small startup building a platform to optimize freight transportation. At the time, no one believed in a young woman fresh out of school, without family connections or backing. I scrambled to find every dollar to pay employees, coming close to bankruptcy more than once. I remember when the company account had only a few $100s left while payroll was due. I stayed up 3 nights in a row negotiating with a small hospital, desperately trying to convince them to sign a trial contract. If they had said no, the company would have collapsed. Thankfully, they agreed. It was just a small breakthrough, but it was enough to keep us alive. Then the pandemic hit. The world was thrown into chaos, hospitals running short on medical supplies, medicine, and equipment. That was when our platform became invaluable. We built a routing system that could track supply and demand in real time, ensuring hospitals were never left without what they needed. A shipment of masks in Texas could be redirected instantly to New York, where doctors were desperate. A truck carrying ventilators stuck in Kansas could be rerouted with just a few clicks. My team and I worked 16-hour days, exhausted but driven by a purpose greater than ourselves. In just 1 year, my company had expanded to serve more than 50 healthcare systems across the United States. The press began calling us the nervous system of the medical supply chain. I stood on the Forbes 30 Under 30 stage, my hands trembling as I held the name plaque, and all I could think, with a bitter ache, was whether my parents would even bother to read the article. The answer, of course, was no. When a Fortune 500 corporation offered to acquire the company for $120 million, it took me a full week to believe the number was real. On the day the deal closed, I walked out of the office, watching the late afternoon sunlight cut through the skyscrapers, and realized I had just closed the chapter on years of hunger and struggle. I no longer had to worry about what dinner would be tomorrow or how I would pay rent. I finally had freedom in my hands. And yet, the most painful part was that my parents' view of me never changed. A few months later, during a family gathering, I came home carrying an elegant gift I had bought in New York. Everyone was buzzing with excitement about Chloe, who had just been hired as an attorney at a prestigious firm in Boston. My mother couldn't stop bragging. "Chloe is so talented, her boss really trusts her." I sat there in silence, no one asking what I was doing. When I finally tried to mention, "I just signed a major deal," my father gave a faint laugh and said, "Well, that's technology hard to understand. Let's go back to talking about Chloe." In that moment, I felt myself slip right back into the place I had always been, the girl sitting at the edge of the table, holding a small gift, quietly staring at the glow of Christmas lights while no one really saw me. I had come so far, survived nights of eating instant noodles, days of sleeping on a sofa, and built a company worth hundreds of millions. But inside that house, none of it mattered. To them, only Chloe was worthy of pride, only Chloe was worthy of love. After the sale of my company closed, I didn't dive into lavish shopping sprees the way people might expect. I didn't buy a sports car, I didn't throw parties in Miami, and I didn't travel the world in luxury. Instead, I chose something I had never truly had in my entire life, a home that belonged entirely to me. A place where no one could shut me out, no one could reduce me to a shadow. And so, I found myself in Aspen, Colorado. The moment I stepped into that snow-covered valley, with the Rocky Mountains towering around me, I knew this was where I would build a place of my own. I purchased a 42-acre property, quietly listed by a wealthy family relocating to Europe. The contract was valued at $5 million, but to me, it was more than just a number. It was a declaration. From the moment I signed the papers, I felt lighter, as if I had finally shaken off the invisible chains that had bound me in my parents' indifferent gaze. I hired a team of local architects and builders, but I was involved in every detail, from the very first sketch to the final finish. This wasn't a project to flaunt wealth, it was my creation, my offering to the little Isabelle who had once been forgotten beneath the Christmas tree. The lodge rose from the ground in cedar wood, its red timber carrying a soft fragrance whenever the sunlight touched it. The front doors opened into a grand hall with soaring ceilings, a granite fireplace big enough for a person to step inside, and a chandelier crafted from rough-hewn pine. The main living room was walled entirely with glass, stretching from floor to ceiling, framing an unbroken view of the snow-capped mountains. Each morning, when the sun rose, the light spilled in, scattering across the frozen landscape like thousands of diamonds falling from the sky. Behind the lodge, I had a private lake dug and stocked with salmon and sturgeon, so in the summer I could fish beneath the warm sun, and in the winter it would freeze into a perfect mirror reflecting the violet sky. Inside, I designed 10 bedrooms, each with its own balcony and private fireplace. The kitchen was lined with black granite, the island carved from a single slab of walnut, and along the wall hung a row of cast-iron pans gifted by a local chef I had hired as a consultant. I chose every piece of furniture myself: brown leather sofas, heavy oak tables, hand-woven wool rugs from the Navajo Valley. Every detail breathed warmth and durability, not the flashy opulence my parents once worshipped. This was a place where I wanted anyone who stepped inside to feel immediately. Here, there is sincerity. Here, every breath of life is cherished. I kept the entire project a secret. Not a word to my family. Not a single photo on social media. When close friends asked, I only smiled and said, I'm busy with a personal project. Because I knew, if my parents or Chloe found out, they would twist it into another story. She just got lucky. She must have had help, or worse, they would drape the credit over Chloe, as they had so many times before. I didn't want this taken from me. I wanted it to be mine, completely, so that when the time came, I could place it on the table like a trump card that flipped the entire game. Whenever I returned to Aspen to check on the progress, I often stayed for several days, sleeping on a makeshift pine bed in a house still smelling of paint and sawdust. At night, I would step out onto the balcony, wrap a thick blanket around my shoulders, and gaze at the mountains washed in silver moonlight, listening to the wind howl down the slopes. That feeling brought back memories of childhood nights when I stood outside the old porch, looking in at the family gathered together without me. But now, it was different. I was no longer the outsider. I was building a home of my own, a world where I chose who was worthy to sit by the fire, and who would remain forever outside the door. When the construction was finally complete, I walked slowly through the house, running my hand across every tabletop, every doorframe. In my mind, one thought echoed over and over. This is my home. Not the home of the younger daughter of the Hart family, not a place where Chloe was always the standard by which I was measured. This was my domain, and no one could deny it. I knew that one day, I would have to bring it into the light, and when that day came, it would be my answer: no shouting, no arguments. Just a silent, undeniable truth. Isabelle was no longer a shadow. I still remember that evening vividly, when the light from my apartment cast its soft golden glow, yet offered me no warmth at all. I held my phone in my hand, my fingers trembling slightly from the sting of the message I had received earlier. A thought flickered. Was it only me who had been excluded? Or had my parents truly wanted a small Christmas, trimming the guest list down for intimacy's sake? I wasn't sure, but I needed to know the truth. I scrolled through my contacts until I stopped at Rachel, my cousin, Aunt Marianne's daughter. I didn't see Rachel often, but every time we talked, it felt genuine. She wasn't fake, she wasn't biased, she was simply honest, sometimes so honest, it surprised people. I pressed call, held the phone to my ear, my heart racing like I was waiting for a verdict. Isabelle? Rachel answered after 2 rings, her voice carrying a note of surprise. You're calling this late. Is everything okay? I took a deep breath and asked bluntly. Rachel, did you get a Christmas invitation from my parents? There was a pause on the other end, a few seconds of silence, and then Rachel let out a dry laugh, a laugh without any joy. They messaged my mom saying this year it's immediate family only, meaning just Chloe and her family. My chest tightened. I pressed further, needing the confirmation. So, you and Aunt Marianne weren't invited either? Rachel responded quickly. No one was. Not even Grandma. She called me today, furious. She said this hasn't happened in 30 years. I sank into the chair, my hand gripping the phone tightly. So, it wasn't just me. They had cut everyone out, also the evening could revolve entirely around Chloe. Memories rushed back last year. When Chloe had her first child, Christmas became a celebration of her little angel. And the rest of us, myself included, were nothing more than background extras. The year before that, when Chloe landed her job as an attorney, my parents turned the family gathering into a showcase of her career. And now it was clearer than ever. They no longer needed anyone except Chloe and the glow of her halo. When the call ended, I sat alone in the darkened room, snow falling thick outside the window. Inside me, a strange current ran through every vein. I saw it more clearly than ever. This was no longer just about me. This was the truth about how my parents had chosen to live, revolving around one perfect child, willing to cast everyone else aside. But I no longer wanted to sit in silence and endure it. I had a place, a mountain home, vast and warm, ready to open its doors. I could create a different Christmas, a new table where everyone had a seat, where no one would be abandoned the way I had been. I pulled out my phone and texted Rachel. If you and your family want, come to my ranch in Aspen. I'll take care of everything." She replied almost instantly, with a mix of surprise and delight. "You have a ranch? Let me tell Mom. But if you're serious, we'll come." 20 minutes later, Rachel called back, her voice bubbling with excitement. "We're in. And I think some of the other cousins will want to come too." I began making more calls, one by one reaching out to the rest of the family. My cousin Eli in Chicago, who had stopped coming to Christmas years ago out of exhaustion with the favoritism, burst out laughing the moment I explained. "A Christmas that doesn't revolve around Chloe and your parents? Count me in." Aunt Marianne grew so emotional she could barely speak. "Isabelle, do you know how long it's been since someone actually took the initiative to gather the family? Thank you." And then, the final call with Grandma left me choked up. She didn't say much, only one simple line. "Just tell me when to pack." My phone lit up constantly with messages of confirmation. What had started as a fleeting thought had now turned into reality. In less than a day, I had a list of over 15 people who agreed to come to the ranch in Aspen. Each new message felt like another brick laid into the foundation of a new kind of Christmas. I was no longer alone. No longer the one left standing outside, peering through the window at a glowing room I was excluded from. This time, I was the one opening the door, inviting them in, giving them a seat at the long dining table, and together we would light up a holiday that finally felt true. Sitting quietly in my chair, I pictured it all. Strings of lights twinkling around the towering Christmas tree, laughter echoing through the cedar lodge, the fireplace crackling warmly against the snowy night. And I saw myself standing at the head of the table, not as an outsider, but as the host. For the first time in my life, I wouldn't be waiting for someone to offer me a seat. I would build the entire table myself, and only those truly worthy would have a place at it. As the guest list grew longer, I knew I couldn't let things unfold carelessly. This wasn't just a gathering. This was the first time I would truly host my own Christmas, my chance to show those who had once been pushed aside that they deserved a holiday that was real, one that honored them. I began planning as meticulously as if I were organizing a major conference, except this time the goal wasn't to close contracts or secure deals, but to mend hearts that had gone far too long without being cherished. I called a local chef I had heard of in Aspen, Margaret, an Appalachian woman renowned for her traditional cooking made with faith and patience. When I invited her to the lodge to talk, the moment she stepped into the granite-tiled kitchen, she looked around and her eyes welled with tears. "I've never seen a kitchen that makes me want to light the stove immediately like this," she said, resting her calloused hand on the countertop as if touching treasure. I told her I wanted a Christmas feast in the truest sense. Roasted turkey with fresh herbs, creamy mashed potatoes, tangy cranberry sauce, golden, crusted apple pie, and thick, frothy eggnog served in warm ceramic mugs. She smiled and nodded. "Leave it to me. No one is going home hungry." At the same time, I began decorating the lodge. I placed a 12-foot tree in the center of the grand hall, its branches so full we had to use a ladder just to hang all the ornaments. I chose golden glass baubles intertwined with bright red ribbons, and at the very top, a silver star that gleamed like ice under the lights. Out on the balcony, I strung hundreds of small golden bulbs, so that when night fell, the entire lodge glowed like a giant gift box nestled in the snowy forest. I also hired a team of local artisans to craft fresh wreaths around the doorframes, woven from pine branches, red berries, and strips of rustic linen. Each time you stepped inside, the scent of resin mingled with cinnamon and dried orange, filling the space with the unmistakable spirit of Christmas. I didn't want anyone to feel like a temporary guest, so I prepared each bedroom as if it were their own home. On Aunt Marian's nightstand, I placed a stack of historical novels I knew she loved, along with a small card that read, "Auntie, I remember you once said reading is like living another life." For Rachel's 2 children, I set out a Snowy City Lego set, wrapped in silver blue paper with their names written on the tags. I could already picture the way they would squeal as they tore the paper apart, their eyes sparkling like fireworks. And for Grandma, I left a box of imported herbal tea, the kind she used to love but rarely allowed herself to buy because it was too expensive. Beside it, I placed a hand-knitted ash-gray wool scarf from a small shop in Aspen with a note that said, "So you can sit by the fire without worrying about the cold." I was even more careful with the smallest details. On the long dining table in the Great Hall, I spread a hand-embroidered white cloth and placed cinnamon and vanilla-scented candles along the center. I arranged for a group of young musicians from town to play violin and guitar in the evening, so the house would be filled with the warmth of Christmas melodies. Outside on the terrace, I had a fire pit lit, stacking dry logs high so anyone could sit by the flames, sip mulled wine, and watch the snow fall. In the small library, I set up a puzzle table for both kids and adults to gather around and build together, instead of staring at their phones. I wanted everyone who came here to feel only one thing: that they were valued, remembered, and truly seen. I didn't forget the entertainment room either. Plush velvet sofas in deep green, a wide projection screen, and a projector ready to play classic Christmas films like It's a Wonderful Life and Home Alone. I pictured the children huddled together under thick blankets, giggling uncontrollably whenever the main characters stumbled into mischief. I had bowls of buttered popcorn and marshmallows waiting so that laughter would echo through the entire lodge. As I looked around, I realized every detail carried a piece of my heart. I wasn't doing this to prove anything to my parents or to Chloe. I was doing it because I knew too well the sting of being forgotten, of being dismissed. I didn't want anyone in my family to carry wounds like mine. I wanted every person who walked into this place to feel that this time, they truly belonged at the table. And most importantly, I wanted to sit down myself, to look around and see faces glowing in the firelight, knowing I had created something different. The night before everyone arrived, I stood alone in the Great Hall. The towering tree shimmered with lights, golden reflections dancing across the cedar walls, and the fireplace burned bright. I sank into the armchair by the window, staring out at the snow falling thick over the lake. My heart beat fast, a blend of nerves and peace. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like the outsider anymore. I was the one writing the script. And in the morning, when the doors opened, I would witness my Christmas begin, a Christmas where no one would ever feel left out again. By early morning, snow had blanketed the steps and railings, the flakes dusting the polished cedar like grains of salt. In the kitchen, Margaret and her two assistants were already bustling in aprons, filling the air with the rich scent of butter, cinnamon, and thyme. Tom made his final rounds with a walkie-talkie clipped to his belt, checking the heating system, reminding people to stack extra baskets of wood near the fireplaces and refill the bin on the porch. I hung 2 more red ribbons at the top of the 12-foot tree in the Great Hall, straightened the silver star, then stepped back to take it all in. Every detail was in its place. Fresh wreaths heavy with berries draped over the doorframes, strings of golden lights waiting to flicker on at dusk, the long dining table draped with embroidered linen. Lined with candles, crystal glasses, and folded napkins, the library stacked with a new puzzle for the children. The projection room preloaded with Christmas films, and on the side table by the fireplace, a neat stack of handwritten cards thanking each person simply for showing up. The first SUV rumbled up the slope into the driveway, its tires crunching over the fine layer of snow. The door swung open and Rachel stepped out, tugging at her coat collar, her eyes wide with disbelief against the pale blur of white. She spun toward me, the car door still ajar, and blurted out in a voice that cracked like a long-suppressed cheer. You built an entire world and never told me?" I laughed, opening my arms to pull her into a hug, hearing the soft patter of melting snowflakes on her hat. In her words, I heard not only amazement but also a quiet relief one I knew all too well. Her 2 children pressed their faces against the doorway, their eyes glowing as they caught sight of the towering tree. Within seconds, they bolted into the Great Hall, only to freeze in awe at the toy train circling around the base of the tree. I led the family down the hall, opening each door marked with their names. When Rachel saw the snowy city Lego set waiting on the nightstand with her children's names carefully written on it, she turned to me, lips trembling without a word. I knew she understood. Here, everyone was remembered. One by one, more cars climbed the hill, headlights trailing like a slow procession of amber lanterns through the winter dusk. Eli arrived from Chicago carrying his guitar in a canvas case, his new girlfriend stepping in shyly before relaxing instantly as the scent of warm apple pie filled the lodge. Uncle Ray embraced me with the kind of hug that needed no words, the hug of a man who didn't speak much all year but would always haul a heavy stack of firewood without hesitation. Aunt Marianne, catching the cedar's fragrance, whispered that it smelled like the home of her childhood. Then quickly wiped her eyes when she spotted the bundle of historical novels tied neatly with twine on her table, a gift that seemed to have waited just for her. I moved through the familiar faces, handing out scarves, taking coats, laughing, guiding each person to their room. The house filled with the sounds of life. Margaret's voice calling out from the kitchen as her spoon clinked against the pot, time to test the cranberry sauce. And somewhere down the hall, Tom's quiet reminder. Watch the steps, the snow's settling again. Before dinner, the children had already claimed the library, tearing open the snowy forest puzzle and scattering pieces across the table. Out on the porch, Eli unzipped his guitar case, tuning the strings until the first warm notes spilled out, glowing like fire in the cold air. Inside, Rachel and I replaced the candles in the bronze holders and checked each place card on the table. There was no kids' table. I had made a point of arranging only one long table, wide enough for everyone to sit side by side. No one shoved to the edges, no one forced to turn a chair just to face someone's back. I placed Grandma near me in the middle so she wouldn't catch a draft, set Aunt Marianne beside Rachel so they could talk easily, and left 2 wide spaces across from the fireplace for anyone carrying little ones. The young musicians from town arrived quietly, setting their instrument cases in the corner, and asked permission to try a soft carol. The violin's notes floated like a ribbon through the air, and even the candle flames seemed to sway more gently. When the moment came, Margaret carried in the turkey golden skin glistening, brushed with melted herb butter pooling at the edges. The aroma rolled across the room in a warm wave, and everyone instinctively leaned forward to breathe it in. I laid the carving knife beside it, then handed it to Uncle Ray, because the way his hand steadied on the handle always made the whole table feel at ease. Mashed potatoes were passed from hand to hand. Cranberry sauce gleamed dark red like wine, roasted Brussels sprouts hissed faintly as the platter was set down, and garlic bread steamed like an open invitation to take more. I poured wine for each person, touching glasses lightly at every seat. No speeches, no grand announcements, only 4 words, "Thank you for coming." And the table began to live on its own, stories weaving back and forth, bursts of laughter catching and spreading like fire, hands reaching across to rest on someone else's arm as old memories resurfaced. What I loved most was the way the children sat among the adults, not banished to some noisy little island of their own. Rachel's son asked Aunt Marianne if Christmas used to feel like this when she was young, and she told him about the papier-mâché tree the whole family once built together. Eli's girlfriend shared the story of her first holiday in the north, when the snow piled so high it froze against the windows. Uncle Ray told of a hunting trip that failed and turned instead into a night of ghost stories by the campfire. Everything wove together like threads in a thick tapestry, and I realized I was standing in the middle of it, no longer on the outside looking through the glass. I raised my glass again when Margaret brought out the apple pie, its crust sparkling with brown sugar, and poured more eggnog into the ceramic mugs. The warmth seeped through my hands, up my neck, softening everyone's eyes to a slower rhythm. It was then that Grandma placed her hand over mine. Her touch was light but steady, the kind of steadiness that comes from a woman who had seen enough winters to know when words are needed and when silence speaks louder. She leaned toward me, her tea-colored eyes fixed on mine, her voice raspy with emotion yet clear as a bell. "You've given us a real Christmas. For the first time in years, we feel like we belong." I couldn't answer right away. Something inside me cracked open, melting like ice, warm and stinging all at once. All I could do was squeeze her hand, nod, and feel that unlike every year before, my thank you wasn't just politeness. It was the only thing keeping me from breaking into tears. After dessert, Eli slipped his guitar strap over his shoulder and strummed the first chords of Silent Night. The whole table hummed along, voices not polished or perfect, but so sincere that even the fire seemed to quiet itself to listen. When the song ended, the children clapped wildly before dashing to the window, pressing their noses to the glass, pointing out which snowflake looked prettier. Rachel tugged me into the center, gathering everyone for a photo in front of the tree. Tom held the camera steady, framing it so the chandelier and fireplace glowed behind us. And in that picture, I saw something I had never seen before. My own face, not tense, not defensive, not forcing a smile to fit into someone else's portrait, but smiling naturally like someone finally at home. Someone sent the photo to the family group chat, along with snapshots of the kids hugging their Lego sets, Grandma sipping her herbal tea, and Uncle Ray raising a glass on the porch. I didn't think much of the pictures beyond the fact that they were beautiful enough to print and pin on the library wall the next day. Night fell quickly in Aspen. I slid open the back door, the cold wind stinging my cheeks as if to remind me I was standing on a real hillside, not a comforting screensaver. Tom had already lit the bonfire by the lake. Sparks rose and died in the dark, popping like a drummer marking the silence. A few people wrapped themselves in wool blankets, sipping mulled wine, sharing how many holidays they had skipped over the years just to avoid squeezing into a table crowded with favoritism. Rachel sat down beside me, leaned her shoulder into mine, and whispered so softly I had to watch her lips to catch it. I don't know what else to say except thank you. Because for the first time, I saw my kids sitting in the right place. I turned to her, pressed my forehead lightly against her temple, and thought this might be the closest thing to an apology fate had ever given us. After everyone drifted back inside, I returned to the great hall. Only the candles remained, their flames sinking low in glass holders, the scent of cinnamon and vanilla still rich in the air. Margaret was gathering silver trays, humming a faint hymn, while Tom set down a fresh basket of wood beside the fireplace. I told them both to rest early, that tomorrow all we'd need to do was reheat the sauce. Margaret smiled and said she had already asked the young musicians to come a bit earlier to rehearse another song, because this house sings better than any concert hall. I lingered a moment longer, running my fingers along the back of a chair, the edge of the table, then gazing out through the tall windows. Beyond the glass, the hillside was ink black but studded with the tiny golden lights strung along the balcony. In the soft crackle of wood, I understood why this night was unlike every Christmas before. It wasn't because the turkey tasted better or because the house was larger. It was because, for the first time, I didn't have to search for my place. My place was here in the home I had built, among the people who had chosen to show up, at a table where every seat carried the same worth. And as I closed the hearth door to bank the fire, I felt my heartbeat slow into a rhythm of someone who had finally returned home after a very long journey. The next morning, pale lights spilled through the tall glass panels, laying a silver sheen across the thick carpet of the living room. I woke in silence, a silence so peaceful it felt like a gift, but it lasted only a few minutes. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, vibrating over and over, the screen flashing without pause. 6 missed calls from my mother, 4 from my father, followed by a flood of messages. Then a new notification lit up, from Chloe. I hadn't opened it yet, but the preview line alone was enough to make my chest sink. Really cheap move, Izzy. Enjoy your little show. I drew a deep breath, picked up the phone, and walked down to the great hall. Grandma was already there, sitting by the fireplace with a cup of herbal tea in her hand, her gaze distant yet peaceful. When she saw me, she smiled. "You're awake? Last night, it was beautiful, Isabelle. The whole family needed that." Her smile made me want to ignore every call flashing on my screen. But then the phone rang again, this time from my mother. I couldn't avoid it forever. I decided to answer and, more importantly, to let Grandma hear too. I pressed the speaker button and set the phone on the wooden table, the fire crackling softly as though it too was listening to what was about to unfold. My mother's voice burst through, sharp and louder than usual. "Isabelle, do you realize what you've just done? The entire town is talking about your Christmas gathering. Pastor even mentioned it during service this morning. Do you know how we're being perceived right now?" I kept my tone even, neither high nor low. You messaged me that this year it would be just Chloe and her family. I simply followed what you said, keeping it small. I hosted my own, without troubling anyone. End of 6. There was a pause, and then my mother rushed in, her words tumbling over themselves, as if trying to drag me into an endless loop of excuses. That's not what I meant. What I meant was, you're always so busy, with work, with projects, I thought you wouldn't want the hassle. And Chloe, well. I cut her off, calm but firm. She's always the center, isn't she, Mom? The air in the room froze. Grandma set her cup gently on the table, her eyes fixed squarely on the phone. I hadn't spoken again before she stepped in, her voice low and steady, each word slicing through the silence like a blade. Judy, Robert, that's enough. You've spent a lifetime neglecting this child. Since she was a little girl in the garage, you acted as if she were invisible. Last night, for the first time in years, I saw her do what the family should have done for her long ago. Give us a real Christmas, Vant. There was a brief silence on the other end before my father spoke, his voice trying for calm but faltering with unease. Mother, you're exaggerating. We were only trying to keep things simple. Chloe, she. Grandma cut in before he could shift the blame. Simple? What does that mean? To see only one child and forget the other? To parade Chloe before the world while Isabelle sits quietly at the kids' table? Last night, I sat in the middle of that table and saw all the people you've cast aside for years. We laughed, we sang, we ate together like a family. And not once did anyone mention Chloe. For the first time, we weren't orbiting around the so-called perfection you built up. A long, heavy sigh dragged across the line. Then my mother's voice, softer now, slipped through. Mother, I never meant to hurt anyone. We just wanted to. Grandma's voice struck back, firm and sharper than the crack of wood in the fire. No, Judy. This is no longer about what you meant or didn't mean. This is about who is seen and who is forgotten. And Isabelle has endured far too much. I sat still, my hand gripping the armrest, my heart pounding but not from fear. For the first time in my life, someone was speaking the words I had swallowed for years, the words I had once silenced with bitten lips while others spoke over me. I heard my father's labored breath, then his short retort. That's not fair. Grandma fired back immediately. Unfair is exactly how you've treated her all these years. Unfair is when she brought home achievements and you brushed them aside, while Chloe only had to smile to be praised. Unfair is when the family gathered and Isabelle was left on the fringe. If fairness existed, she wouldn't have had to build a new table just so the rest of us could finally have a place to sit. There were no more defenses. The line went silent, the only sound left was the fire crackling in the hearth. I exhaled a long breath, and for the first time, I didn't feel the need to justify myself. I simply said, I think that's enough. We'll talk later, if we need to. I pressed the button to end the call and placed the phone face down on the table. In that moment, I felt lighter, as if a stone that had weighed on my chest for years had finally been lifted. I leaned back in the chair, and Grandma set her hand on my shoulder. She didn't say anything more, only gave a gentle squeeze. In her eyes, I saw pride mixed with sorrow. Sorrow for having to watch her own daughter, my mother, fail at the very role of being a mother. But, for me, that moment no longer felt like a wound. It was closure, a door finally shut behind me. I didn't feel weak, nor did I feel the urge to argue anymore. I only felt release. Because from that moment forward, I knew I had my own table, my own home, and a true family who chose to show up, people who chose me, not just Chloe. My phone didn't stay silent for long after that call. But this time, the vibrations weren't sharp like accusations. They came gently, warmly, like a soft knock, reminding me that someone outside still wanted to come in. The first message was from Rachel. Sis, last night was wonderful. I've never seen the kids laugh so much. Next year at the ranch again? I'll bring gingerbread cookies. Reading it, my chest glowed as if a fire had sparked inside, and I found myself touching the edge of the chair just to ground myself in the truth that it had all really happened. Right after, Eli sent a flood of photos. The kids gathered around the tree, Aunt Marianne cradling her stack of new books, Uncle Ray raising a glass of wine on the porch, and one picture of me smiling a rare smile, unforced. Beneath it he wrote, "This is family. You gave us something we all thought was impossible. Don't let this be the first and the last." I stared at the screen, remembering all the years I had waited quietly to be named in the family story, and no one ever did. But today, a cousin had written it plainly for me to see. This time, I wasn't the shadow anymore. The family group chat, which for years had been nothing more than a place to share a few photos of the kids or toss around half-hearted birthday wishes, suddenly came alive. Someone sent a picture of a plate of turkey with the caption, "Better than any Christmas I've ever had." Another shared a video of the group singing Silent Night, Eli's guitar weaving through Uncle Ray's gravelly voice, and everyone who replayed it dropped heart emojis in response. Aunt Marianne wrote, "We need to make this a tradition. Isabelle, you lead us. Every year at the ranch." Minutes later, Grandma chimed in, her typing slow but steady. "That place carries the warmth of family. We will return, all." I sat in the living room, phone in hand, surrounded by the fading glow of embers in the fireplace. Never had I felt so clearly seen. Not because the ranch was grand, not because the food was elaborate, but because everyone genuinely acknowledged me as the one who had created the space for all of us. The focus no longer revolved around Chloe. No one was asking what the golden daughter had done, worn, or said. The story had shifted, like a river carving a new course. Now the conversation was about next year, about us, with the name Isabelle right at the center. Rachel sent another message. "Kayla and I are thinking of renting a bigger car next year to bring the in-laws. They'll love the ranch." Eli added, "I'll bring a small band from Chicago, we'll play live." Another cousin chimed in, "I'll handle the desserts. Isabelle doesn't need to do everything." The messages poured in, but this time they didn't feel suffocating. I smiled to myself, scrolling line after line, drinking them in like water after years of thirst. That evening, as I was stirring a cup of hot cocoa, Grandma came to sit beside me. She stayed silent for a while, her eyes fixed on the fire as if reading memories in the glowing embers. Then she spoke softly. "Do you see it, Isabelle? You've changed everything. Before, family gatherings always revolved around your parents and Chloe. Everyone else only showed up out of obligation. But this time, everyone felt they had a place. That is what family truly means." I nodded, my eyes burning. For years, I had asked myself whether I had the strength to change my role, or whether I was destined to remain on the outside forever. Now the answer was clear. I could create a new table, one where everyone truly belonged. In the days that followed, the family group chat stayed alive with energy. Someone posted photos of snow on the drive home, another shared that the kids hadn't stopped singing the carols from that night. One cousin even joked, "If Chloe finds out, she'll lose her mind." Strangely enough, no one mentioned my parents, no one asked why they hadn't been there. They had removed themselves from the story, and everyone else no longer felt the need to bring them up. That was the real shift. The focus was no longer on who hadn't come, but on the ones who had shown up. I felt myself grow lighter as I realized that sometimes family isn't the people who boast about one child while ignoring the other. True family is made of those who choose to come, choose to sit down, choose to hold your hand and say, "We needed this." In the quiet evenings, I wrote down everything that had happened to carve it deeper into memory. The glow of faces around the table, the laughter that needed no mask, the imperfect but heartfelt music. It all played in my mind like a film I would carry with me for the rest of my life. On the final night before everyone left, I stood on the porch watching the snow fall. Rachel came up beside me and whispered, "Do you realize it? This year we didn't follow them. We followed you." I turned to her, her eyes shining with the reflection of the golden balcony lights. I didn't answer right away. I just wrapped my arm around her shoulders. Inside me, a truth rang clear. I had stopped chasing a seat at someone else's table. I had built my own, and everyone had chosen to sit with me. The next morning, as the last group of cars wound their way down the mountain, I stood watching their taillights fade into the valley. My heart was filled with a feeling both new and familiar. Not sadness at parting, but anticipation. Anticipation for the day they would return, for the chance to prepare personalized gifts again, to hang fresh wreaths, to hear the guitar ring out in the cold air once more. And this time, I knew for certain. Christmas was no longer the haunting reminder of exclusion. It had become proof that I was strong enough to change the story, to step from the one left out into the one chosen. That night, I opened my phone and typed one simple line into the group chat. Next year, the ranch will be open. Whoever wants to come, come. For anyone who truly wants to show up, this table will always have a seat. A flood of hearts, wine glasses, and Christmas trees filled the screen within seconds. I closed the phone, leaned back in my chair, shut my eyes, and listened to the wind whistling across the roof of the wooden lodge. For the first time in my life, I felt complete peace. I no longer needed my parents' praise, nor Chloe's recognition. Everything was already enough because, at last, I had been seen. A week after the whole extended family had left the ranch, the silence of the Aspen Mountains returned. Snow kept falling, covering the trails and steps in a steady white blanket, but inside the lodge, it was only me and a few staff tidying up. That quiet, instead of making me feel lonely, felt like the mountains themselves exhaling, giving me space to sit and truly think about what came next. Even though I had found a kind of release, one question lingered in my mind. Would my parents and Chloe ever truly understand, or was I destined to let this distance remain permanent? After many nights of turning it over, I sent a message so brief and simple I almost surprised myself. If you want, you and Chloe can come to the ranch for dinner. Just immediate family, no one else. I had no expectations. I only wanted to see if, for the first time, given the chance to sit at my table, they might actually really hear the things I had never said aloud. They arrived on a late winter afternoon when the sky was cast in leaden gray and the wind whipped hard across the ridges. I stood on the front porch, wrapped in a thick sweater, watching their familiar SUV crawl up the hill. My father stepped out first, his face stern but his eyes flickering with uncertainty. My mother followed, pulling her scarf tight, avoiding direct eye contact. Chloe got out last, her leather boots sinking deep into the snow, lips pressed tightly together. I invited them in, took their coats, and led them to the dining room I had prepared. Dinner was far simpler than the week before. Roast beef, mashed potatoes, red wine, and fresh bread still warm from the oven. No music, no twinkling lights, only the soft glow of candles on the wooden table. We sat down, the silence stretching thin across the table. My father cleared his throat. The house, it's beautiful. My mother added softly. Different from what I imagined. Chloe said nothing, her eyes wandering around the room, occasionally flicking toward me before dropping back down. I poured the wine, slid their glasses across, then rested my hand on the table and drew a long breath. I didn't invite you here tonight to show off, and not to accuse. I just want to say the things I was never allowed to say. No one objected. The air was thick, but I knew I had to continue. I spoke of the Christmases when I was forgotten, the times my achievements were left hanging in the middle of family conversations, the feeling of being made to sit at the kids' table even when I already knew who I wanted to become. I told them about the years at Stanford, eating instant noodles, sleeping on sofas while still receiving messages from home praising only Chloe, making her parents so proud. I recalled the moment my company was sold for $120 million, and how my father only gave a faint smile and said, "Technology's too complicated. Let's talk about Chloe instead." Each word I spoke felt like removing another stone that had weighed on my chest for years. My father bowed his head, fingers rolling the rim of his glass. My mother looked at me, her eyes glistening though no tears fell. Chloe stayed silent, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. When I finally stopped, the dining room fell into stillness. Then my father murmured, "Maybe." I didn't see it all. My mother followed, her voice small but genuine. "I never meant to, Isabelle. But maybe I made you think I wasn't proud." The truth is, I was. I just didn't say it. I didn't reply, didn't forgive outright, but for the first time I heard honesty, however late it had come. Chloe still didn't speak. She only held my gaze for a long moment, her eyes no longer mocking, but carrying an emptiness I couldn't name. Dinner ended awkwardly, but not with the suffocating silence of the beginning. As they prepared to leave, my father shook my hand firmer than usual. My mother embraced me, briefly, yet long enough for me to feel that something had shifted. Chloe was the last to step out, pausing at the door. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but only gave a slight nod before turning away. I didn't stop her. I didn't expect a perfect apology. It was enough that, for once, they had listened. On New Year's Eve, I sat alone on the balcony, a wool blanket wrapped around my shoulders. Snow fell thick and steady, catching the dim silver of the moon, and the whole valley lay in a sacred kind of silence. I held a glass of wine, breathed in the biting cold that filled my lungs, and closed my eyes. In my mind, the words rose like a vow. I don't need to wait for anyone to give me a seat. I have built my own table and opened the doors for those who truly know how to cherish it. If you're listening to this story, I want you to remember one thing. You don't need anyone's approval to have worth. Being forgotten or compared does not mean you are small. You can build your own table, one where only those who truly value you will have a seat. I was once pushed to the sidelines, once convinced I was invisible. But out of that pain, I learned how to rise, to choose myself, and to build a life on my own terms. And you can do the same. See your wounds not as an ending, but as the fuel that drives you to create a new kind of family, one made of friendship, kindness, and resilience. One day, you'll realize the table you've built is more beautiful than anything you ever dreamed.